Hi everybody, how's it going today? Hope you're well. As I've already mentioned in a video I made a couple of videos back now, I'm planning to return to the UK at some point in the coming months. And I don't know, I was just kind of reminiscing this morning about my old life in the UK, and I guess, kind of worried about falling into old habits and, just kind of what the future holds and where do I go from here now at 35 years old? What's the pathway forward for me? What is my future? I've been out of the UK for almost a decade. I don't own a house there. I won't be going back into some cushy little job or career. I'm essentially kind of starting my life over, really. Having to reset. I guess almost reinvent myself. And on the surface, that might seem like a good thing. And it is. But it's also going to be extremely difficult because, it's going to be hard to deal with the reverse culture shock and having to acclimatise to the way of life there. And, it's so easy to get caught up in the comfort and the habits and the routines of your life, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. And then to make a big life change, to move to another part of the city, maybe another part of the country, or to move abroad somewhere, better opportunities. But as they always say, the grass isn't always greener. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try. That doesn't mean you shouldn't give yourself the opportunity to go and do something different, do something new, something interesting. But sometimes it just, there are just times in life where you do kind of wonder whether you've made the right decisions, whether you've made smart choices along the way, whether you've sabotaged your life, whether you've thrown away precious time and precious opportunities that could have led you to new paths in life and new people and new situations and travel and money. And I guess I think reminiscing this morning was have I really, do I really have much of a life left at this point? It's what does it say about me that, I'm essentially a failed, it's just kind of pathetic, isn't it, really? Failed ESL teacher who couldn't make it in Thailand, so he has to go back to the UK. I mean, it's just, what do you even say about that? I mean, it's not, it's a bit more complicated than that, but essentially that's basically the bottom line of it. I mean, I didn't fail so much. Maybe I'm being too hard on myself. I didn't really fail. I stuck it out for almost a decade and just came to the conclusion that I just wasn't the right fit for it. But I kept going. I kept trying, and But in the end, I just realised that I was wasting my life away on it. I was wasting my energy on something that's just doesn't education really doesn't have any real meaning here. And I kind of feel sorry for people who get stuck in it, because I know what it's like to get stuck in that way of life of living paycheck to paycheck, and it's all going well, being over here, but it's not really a life. I mean, it's essentially a nice little breakaway for a couple of years, and but it's not. It's just not a way of life that I think is sustainable in the long run, really. It's not something that you can do, I would say, unless you've got if you've got your life together a bit, then I would say, yeah, okay, give it a shot, whatever. But if you've got some savings, or you're about to reach retirement, or you are at retirement, then it's a nice little pocket money earner. Of course, if you're really serious about this whole thing, then you can make a real genuine career out of it, I guess. If you want to go up the ranks over here and earn up to, let's say, 80,000, 90,000 baht per month. I don't know what that comes up to, but it must be probably a good, I don't know, 2,500, 3,000, maybe over $3,000 a month or something. But you're talking about a life where you basically, you're just talking about, a complete lack of freedom at that point. It's like all your effort's going to be into your job, and you're never really going to have any time. It's like if you've got the tolerance to keep that up, if you're really passionate about it, and if that's something you're genuinely interested in, then go for it. But I think you have to get to a point at some time in your life where you have to figure out, is this something that's sustainable for me? Whatever it is that's going on, whatever job you're doing, whatever career you're doing, is it sustainable? Is it financially viable? Is it wise to continue down this path? And not just in work, but just in general. We all surely at some time or other reach a crossroads in life, and reach a point where we just start to kind of ponder and, what the fuck are we doing? Where are we going here? Thinking back on going back to the UK, it's kind of like bothers me sometimes, like, because I just feel like a failure. I feel like I'm just like, I've achieved nothing. I've done nothing. Going back to my roots kind of thing. But maybe it's what's needed, as much as I hate the idea of going back and having to kind of face the ghosts of my past, as it were. Because that's essentially all I ever really do, really, and that's it. It's just apart from when I'm busy or meeting people, whatever. It's just essentially me just riding around the city on my bike, just revisiting old wounds, basically, revisiting old places that remind me of certain times, that remind me of certain people. Ex-partners, old friendships, old jobs. When my secondary school or high school there's a cycle path, and I used to often go down there, and the main building's gone now, but the ground is kind of pretty much more or less the same as it was. Well, the last time I saw it anyway. Certainly my primary school is more or less as it was back then, give or take a few. Give or take a few improvements to the basic infrastructure of the place, but anyway, it's kind of irrelevant. But just used to spend so much time like going past these places and trying to feel something, trying to connect some part of myself, I guess. Wanting to feel like youthfulness again. I wanted to feel what it was to still be young, and I don't like to use the word innocent, but let's use that word. I'm certainly naive anyway. And certainly more ignorant than I am now. It's so easy to get caught up in that kind of cycle, that trap of kind of opening old wounds and longing for the past. And it's not just the direct connections to me, the more meaningful stuff. It's the going back, it's confronting the fact that this is not the place that I grew up in. It doesn't look the same anymore. It doesn't feel the same anymore. So that kind of bothers me about going back, is that it's almost like a different place now. When I went back there last time, it just felt so alien to me, really. I almost didn't recognise the place. I didn't recognise myself in it anymore. And I saw a few people from my past, and I didn't really have time for you anymore. And the best you could hope for is a hi, how are you? And that was about it, really. Everyone's grown up. Everyone's got kids. Everyone's pretty much more or less settled down. And I suppose, if I'm telling the truth, it's not so much jealousy, but just like a feeling inadequate, I guess. Feeling like I didn't achieve anything, like just feeling, that should have been me. That should have been me. It should have been me with that woman, that person, that girl I really liked. That should have been me. I should have been chosen. Why wasn't I? Why couldn't I have been your partner? Why do you have to choose that loser? It's like, why? If I'd have been given a chance, I probably would have made something more of myself. Would have achieved. And it's like, of course, you can't point the finger and blame others, but I'm just saying that I do think that I would have probably made more of an effort to stay and to do more things in my life there if I'd have met or been with some of the people I would have liked to have been with. But that's life, isn't it? That's life. You don't always get everything you want in this world. You don't always get the girls you want. You don't always get the jobs you want. You don't always get the opportunities you want. You don't always get to be friends with the people that you would like to be friends with. You come into existence and you're slowly but steadily forced into the deep end, and you better quickly figure things out. Some of it's instinct, some of it's intuition. Think about when you were as a kid, did you really truly active make an effort to be friends with the people you became friends with? Not really. It's like you just kind of happened naturally. You were drawn to certain people were drawn to you for some reason or other. It was a common hobby or whatever it was, the fact that you were of the same age and in the same class, and the truth is that I never really had the friendships I wanted. I never really truly had the girlfriends I would have liked to have had, apart from one. There was one girl, I've mentioned her a few times, called Rebecca. She was really the girl I would have liked to have spent my life with. But she was just too, and like myself, we were just two very fucked up individuals, with our own problems, and we were, if you can call it together, when we were 15, I think it was, or 14, 15, I think it was. But, at the end of the day, you can't cling on to the past, really. It's like you can't, there's no point really holding on to it. It's like, it's gone, it's dead, it's finished, you'd be lucky if these people even think about you anymore. If old friends don't even bother to reach out to you, it's like you can't expect anybody else to. Even if you've actively tried to maintain communication with certain people, so it's just this sense of, sometimes I just think, like, should I go back? What am I going back to? Unemployment, loneliness, depression, boring way of life, shit weather, shit economy. I don't particularly want to stay here either, but if I'm honest. But I think sometimes, that's kind of why I've stayed over here for so long, because I just couldn't make a choice. I was so indecisive, I just couldn't make a decision. Which is, in the end, which one is actually the best way to go. It's like, okay, I go back and, I start paying tax again and pay into the system and prop up my pension account, my pension pot, that there's no guarantee that I'm going to live long enough to get access to, but who knows? Because essentially that's the only real reason to go back at this point, I say. It's like just to pay into the pension pot, because, I think at this point it's going to get harder it's definitely going to be harder to get into a job there, because it's just really bleak, if I'm honest with you. It's just my future at the moment seems very bleak. Doesn't seem very, I don't know, it's just not filling with any real hope, if I'm honest. I mean, like, it's not technically true. Like, there are moments where I think, it's for the best, probably, that I go back and, try and kind of make something of myself. But then I think to myself, like, when I was there last time, what did I really do last time I was there? But then again, the circumstances were a bit different last time I went back to the UK. Because I was planning on coming back anyway. But this time, I don't know. I don't really know what's going to happen. I don't know whether I'm going to come back to Thailand at some point or not, if I'm honest. I really don't know. I don't know if this is completely the end of a chapter or it's just a kind of temporary stage. I don't know. I don't know what it will be, but I think that, I think it's inevitable, really, that I have to go. I would have to go back to the UK at some point anyway. So I might as well just do it. Just be decisive for once in my life. Stop delaying the inevitable and stop this endless cycle of stagnation. Just make a choice and just stick with it. Because that's the most difficult thing to do. It's to make a difficult choice, because you just don't know what the outcome's going to be. It's so easy to stay stuck because it's comfortable, it's familiar. It. But that change, there's no guarantee of anything. There's no guarantee of success. It's always a gamble, But then again, you don't know what might happen. You don't know what could come of it. Whether that's with new opportunities for work, whether it's rekindling old friendships, whether it's old flames, maybe. I don't know. Because I don't know. I don't know what the future of my relationship with Thailand is, and I certainly don't know what the relationship with my partner is going to be, as far as the long-term future is concerned. But I think it's going to be extremely difficult to maintain a long-term, long-distance relationship, even though we are married, when we're on opposite sides of the world. And so that's something that bothers me as well. You know, even though it certainly isn't a perfect or ideal situation in many ways. It's like sometimes you just have to think, you know, what is truly the best option? What is the best thing to do? You know, is the best thing for me to just stay here and just try and tolerate some crap, shitty job for another year or something, so I can save up enough money so I can go back to the UK at some point and have some money saved up, you know, so I can try and get into some career or training or college course or something to give me a much better chance. I mean, that would be the ideal thing to do. But again, you know, you've got to go through all the bureaucratic bullshit of getting the visa and the work permit, as I've mentioned before on another video. And that's expensive, as I mentioned before, and it's a bit of a tedious, long process. And again, you know, there's just absolutely no guarantee that will be so many people's applications for work permits are rejected. And you know, I just don't know. I think the reality of this whole thing is just, I just don't know what to do. I really don't know what to do. Neither option is ideal. Neither option is good. I stay here. I take on some job if I can get access. You know, at the end of the day, it's basically either I work illegally here for a few months, or I just have to go down the route of getting the non-being work permit, hopefully, and stick it out for another year or two until I've got enough money to go back to the UK. Because I think, honestly, ideally, I would have liked to have gone back when Labour were out of power, and, you know, given that's probably not going to happen until, you know, 2029 probably, so we've got a few years to go yet. I mean, I suspect we'll be out of power before then, but anyway, I don't want to talk about politics here. I'm getting bored of politics these days. I just don't trust anyone, if I'm honest with you, politically speaking. But anyway, that's a discussion for another day. You know, going back, I don't really want to go back because just too many bad memories there. There's just too many places that just remind me of my older self, my younger self, my more energetic, more buoyant, perhaps happier self in some ways. You know, but, you know, seeing the place, you know, having to walk past, well, not having to, but sometimes, you know, going past, you know, places I grew up in, you know, my places of my childhood, my formative years, my adolescent years, my young adult years, you know, houses I grew up in. It's a funny thing, nostalgia, really. You know, it's a bittersweet thing. It really is. It's nice to have the memories. It's nice to be able to go past places and them still be there. But sometimes, you know, I wish they kind of went, really, because then there'd be, you know, there'd be no magnetism. There'd be no reason to go certain places. Because it's just this, and to me, nostalgia is not too dissimilar to heartache, really. It's essentially what it is. It's heartache, it's longing, it's a kind of dulled, depressive kind of a feeling. It's an element of, it's a bit of sadness, it's a bit of temporary relief, it's a bit of joy, I guess, that, that was me once, that was, sometimes it's good to just to kind of go down reminiscent lane just to kind of see where you've come from and how you've changed. But at the same time, it's difficult to accept that it's all gone and it's all gone with the wind, the winds of time, the winds of change. You go back to the place you grew up in, you see that, especially if you haven't visited for a few years, just the landscape's changed, it's just, there are new generations now and that are becoming teenagers or adults and you just look at them and you you think to yourself, that was me, that was me not that long ago. I was that kid playing in the park, I was that teenager hanging out with the friends outside the shopping centre, that was me in that bar, that was me in that pub at one time. And it's not anymore. And I think, honestly, as I'm getting older, like the novelty of life is starting to become a little bit kind of just I don't know, I just feel that like life is just not as fun anymore. Life is not as interesting anymore. It's not, and it's because I'm less ignorant. It's because I'm less naive, and life's fun when you're young because you don't know anything about the world. You don't know anything about yourself yet. You don't really know anything about the people around you, really. You live in this world of ignorance until I would say you're early to mid-20s, really, for the most part. Yeah, you're learning things as you're going along, but you don't really truly know the darker stuff, that the really difficult stuff that nobody talks about until you get a bit older. I'd say until probably mid to late 20s, 30s. The real difficult truths about your friendships, about relationships and society and politics and culture and, human interactions and, just the levels of corruption that are running things and et cetera, et cetera. And even when you do visit, and if you're lucky enough or unlucky enough to bump into people that you used to know, it's kind of even worse, really, than sometimes it's actually worse bumping into people than it is to long for these people in some ways, because when you're longing, there's this kind of like veil of like hope. There's this sense of maybe, but then when you bump into people you haven't seen for years and they've got kids and they've put on some weight, they've obviously aged a bit, and you kind of see the energy that's been sucked out of them over time, and it's just really it's upsetting, really. It's really quite sad. You're glad that they're alive, you're glad that they're well, but that version of them that you thought that you knew, that you thought that was them, is gone, and the same for you, that you're not the same person to them anymore. And that's kind of what it's like to go back to places in general that you used to love, you used to like, you used to feel that you fitted into somehow. It's like it felt natural to you. It felt normal. You didn't really question it. That was just how it was. And then sometimes that's the difficulty of moving away and going back, is that you have to confront that stuff. It's hard to accept that it's not the same place anymore. It's not the same it hasn't got the same vibe to it anymore. Hasn't, because you're in a different stage of your life. You've grown up, you've matured, you've learnt some stuff along the way, and you're not that stubbornly ignorant person anymore. You're not that wildly naive, head in the skies, kind of wishful thinking, eternally hopeful, eternally optimistic person that you might have been at one time, or at least used to be more optimistic and hopeful. And so there's just this kind of just feeling that like life's kind of passed you by, it's gone, your time's gone away, there's not really much left of you to give anymore. There's not really much of you. You've kind of, you've done it. You've been there. You've done it. You've done your childhood. You've done your teenage years. You've done your young adulthood. What now? What's next? What's the next phase of my life? What's the next? Do I have anything to look forward to from this point on? Is there anything to cling on to now? Can I be happy about anything? Can I even just be happy? Do I any longer have the capability to be happy anymore? When you've been so stuck in this depressive state for so long, you do start to ask the question, what does it mean to be happy? Because I don't know what it is anymore. I don't know what happiness is. I don't know what it is to be joyous. I don't really even know what it really means to have fun anymore. Because so many of our, these things that we're told are so vitally important to us, they're attached to parts of our past, aren't they? And so I think there comes a point in life where we almost have to kind of redefine happiness for ourselves. We have to turn things around. We have to create new definitions of what it is to be joyful and happy and content and, in a good place and feeling good. But I also think at the same time, we shouldn't, I think we have to be careful not to force it as well. I think if you're trying to go back into parts of yourself that no longer exist to try and feel something again, I think that's a real mistake. Because that won't bring you any happiness. That won't bring you, all you have to do is spend some time around, let's say, if you've got kids of your own, or your friends have got kids and you spend time around them, you kind of, that was you at one time. That used to be you. That used to be you can see yourself in them, and you don't relate to them anymore. You can't relate to them anymore. Your childhood seems so far away, and yet that was you. If you go to, anywhere around your local area, or city centre, or wherever you live, you're gonna come across small groups of teenagers, whatever they're doing these days on fucking TikTok or whatever, or just hanging about, whatever, talking, chatting, smoking, drinking. That was you as well. That used to be you as well. That was me at one time. And sometimes it's hard to see those things. It's really hard to confront those really difficult, really hurtful parts of yourself, that where did my childhood go? How did it go? How did it disappear so quickly? And my teenage years just seemed to kind of come and go. It was like they went away in a flash. In hindsight, they seemed to. I mean, obviously, at the time it seemed like they were long, but in hindsight, it felt like. And the reason for that is because I've now been an adult. longer than I was a teenager. I've been an adult longer than I was a child. So it's like the longer you are in your phase of adulthood, the less you can connect with people. The less you see yourself in the children of today, the teenagers of today, the young adults of today. I don't even recognize myself, see myself. I can't connect myself with the youth anymore. Like I don't, it's obviously apart from like the use of smartphones. And apart from that, I don't know. I just don't see myself in them. Because I'm not there, am I? I'm a 35-year-old man. I'm not a 15-year-old anymore. I'm not a 7-year-old child anymore. I'm not a 3-year-old. I'm not an infant. I'm not a baby. I'm not a 20-year-old, overgrown teenager anymore. I'm not also at the, my peak of let's say masculinity, if you like, anymore. I'm not at the peak of my strength or brain matter, my brain capabilities anymore either. And it's hard, it's really difficult to like come to terms with the fact that you are not somebody that you might think you are, that you're not, that other people see you in a different way than you see yourself. It's really difficult. It's really hard to really truly grasp that. When you bump into people from your past, all of that stuff is amplified. Like you realise all that stuff. That time's moved on and life's gone on and people have changed and you've changed. You just don't realise it sometimes. You don't really think about it that much. But you've changed. You're just as much a stranger to them as they are to you now. So yeah, you recognise them. They sound more or less the same. They look, pretty much more or less the same as they did, just a bit older. But in the terms of like their development and where they're at in life now, like it's, unless you've got some things in common, unless you've got kids of your own, or whatever, you still keep in contact with each other, or you're doing some similar kind of hobbies or whatever. It's like, but it's not even so much that. I think it's really down to, and the main thing that drives a wedge between people, I would say overall, is maturity. That's what I've come to realise, is that people gravitate towards those, I would say, more or less overall, I would say that people generally gravitate towards those of a similar maturity to them. That's what I've learned anyway. It's just my observation. I don't know how accurate that is overall, but that's just, I don't know. It's just something that I've personally noticed. And I think, when you go, I think what it comes down to in the end is that, when you go back to old places or you see old faces again, often in some ways they haven't changed that much. They've just gotten older, basically. And so have you have as well. But at the same time, it's this thing of like, they kind of still seem a bit immature to you. And you might be a little bit more mature in some ways than they are, but maybe in some other ways they're more mature than you. They've got kids, they've dealt with all of that stuff you haven't, but you've probably learnt more about yourself, you've learnt more about life in other ways, just without the kids. And I think that's a difficult thing to realise, that you might not be able to reconnect because too much time's gone past. They've obviously developed new friendships since yours with that person ended. So they've kind of filled that part of, they've filled they've refilled that kind of space that you once occupied with somebody else. Yeah, essentially at the end of the day, really, people just go looking for things to refill, to refill the holes in their lives. Whether that's, with romantic partners, whether it's with friendships, whether it's with lost loved ones, people go looking for something to fill that void in their life. They either do it through coping mechanisms of one kind or another, or they do it through meeting people, or trying to meet people, or looking for people with certain traits that there are certain things I think that people like in their friendships with their partners on a subconscious level that represent parts of their mothers, their fathers, their siblings, maybe their friends, etc., or even parts of themselves. At the end of the day, I don't want to go back to the UK. It's the truth. It's because I don't really want to get back on that plane. I just feel like, halfway into the flight, oh God, I've made a mistake here. Landing back in the UK, oh God, what the fuck have I done here? Why did I come back here again? Because that's kind of how I felt last time, to some extent. I remember going through Heathrow Airport and London Heathrow, and the staff was so rude, just very cold, indifferent kind of approach to everything, and it just didn't feel very friendly to me at all. It felt people just seem very distant and cold these days over there. I don't know. It's just, it wasn't too bad in my city, but again, I almost didn't recognise it in some ways. It was. I mean, of course, I recognised it. I lived in it for over 20 years, but I just mean that it didn't feel the same to me anymore, because I didn't feel the same myself. I felt different. By the time I went back, I was 29. I left when I was still 24. I had my 25th birthday in China. It was it was a kind of a different chapter in my life then. When I left, I was still relatively young, and then by the time I'd come back, temporarily anyway, I was more mature and, a bit more mature. And, it just... It wasn't just the fact that I was going back and I kind of felt shitty about the fact that I didn't really have any choice. I had to go back to the UK anyway. And actually, in the end, it actually turned out to be a really positive thing, because I got to spend time with my late uncle, who passed away a few years ago. So I kind of don't regret that. I'm glad I went back, actually. Not that I had any choice, but I'm glad that I did. It turned out to be a good thing in the end, I suppose, for quite a few reasons. But certainly having to, go and living with your parents again when you're 29, and it's not exactly ideal, is it? It's just and obviously seeing your parents older as well, and just everything was just kind of it's just really weird and awkward, and just a really strange time, really, if I'm honest. I didn't mind it, but I just felt such a burden to everybody, my parents. I felt shitty, the fact that, I mean, I don't think they necessarily minded me being there, to be honest. I think it was nice for them to, it was not, I'm glad that I got to spend time with my parents and my family, but I just wish it hadn't have been in that kind of situation, really. It was unfair on them. There was already limited space anyway in the house, and I don't know, I just felt really shit about it. And then, the arguments with my brothers and my parents from time to time, and it was just really weird, and it's such a strange feeling as a technically a mature adult to go back and have to live with your own parents for a period of time. It's really embarrassing. It's really kind of, talk about feeling ashamed of yourself, and it's not their fault. It's got nothing to do with them. That's my own. It was kind of out of my hands, I suppose. In the end, I didn't really have anywhere else to go at the time. the only difference in going back this time around is that I'll be, well, for the most part, I don't really have any other options really apart from either staying with my parents or staying with my sister. So I'll have to stay with my sister. But at least in that way, it might be a little bit better. Because my sister goes out. My sister will be out at work most of the time anyway. And also, if she goes on holiday, at least she has someone to take care of the house and whatever. So, but it also means that I also have to really step up now, because, I will really have to be independent probably for the third time in my life. So, maybe I need this, maybe this is something that needs to happen. Maybe the life just has a natural way of just sort of like pushing you towards things that you need to do. You have to do. You don't want to do it. It's difficult. It's hard. You've got all sorts of conflicting thoughts and feelings and emotions going on about it. But I just think there comes a point in your life where you have to say, I have to be decisive. I have to make a choice and stick with it. Because the problem is, if you don't do that, you get stuck in this cycle of like being decisive one minute, then indecisive the next, and that's why you get into that cycle of stagnation, because you never make a choice and you never stick to something, because you're always worried about what the outcome might be. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, well, when you weigh up everything up overall as best as you possibly can, which is the better option? Is it better to stay where you are and try to make some kind of a change if you can? But it's not always possible, though. Things aren't always easy as people like to make them out to be. Just because you live in the Western world doesn't mean that life's easy. It doesn't mean that everything's straightforward. It's like, there's so much bureaucratic bullshit in the West that other parts of the world don't really understand. It's like, okay, they've got their own serious problems, and I accept that. And I'm grateful that I belong to part of the world as got certain parts of it's developed, and it's got clean water and access to food and etc. But it's all the bureaucratic shit that makes life over there miserable. That's why people are miserable. That's why I was miserable last time I was there. And I will be next time I go back. Because it's all the red tape of everything. It's all the endless bureaucratic processes of, you've got to do this and this and this, and, dot the I's and cross the T's for everything, anything and everything you want to do. And that's what makes life so hard over there, is that it's everything's a process, everything's a ball ache, everything's got to be about endless documents and forms and rules and regulations and everything for everything you do now. And some of it's useful, granted, some of it is beneficial to make sure things are legitimate and that's great. But it just means that life's stressful all the time, that your life is always at the whim of somebody else's decisions. It's always somebody else's decisions that have a massive impact on how your life develops or not. It starts at school. It starts with the way your parents treat you. It goes on through how your friendships blossom or don't. Your relationships. Your college or university education. Whether somebody gives you a job or not. Whether you get the opportunity to do certain things or don't. It's always so when people say like your life is in your own hands, but is it though? Is it? I don't really think it is. I think often life is often in other people's hands. You can do what you can to try and convince and persuade, and you can put yourself as a best position as you possibly can. But at the end of the day, it's always somebody else's decision, certainly in the West, in more important aspects of life that decide your fate, that decide your future. So you don't really have total control over your own life. You don't really have full autonomy. You don't really truly have a real sense of freedom over your own direction in life. That's bound by other people's decisions. You know, think about, you know, if you get pulled over by the police for speeding, then that officer's got two choices. They can either give you a ticket or they can give you a warning. You know, that ticket could mean that, you know, you can't afford to get something you wanted to get, you know. And or, you know, you accidentally get involved in a you know, a car crash or whatever, and it fucks your car up, and now that holiday you've got booked, you know, you can't afford it anymore. You can't afford to go anymore. So it's like, you know, people talk about freedom all the time, you know, personal agency and all this kind of stuff, and that it's like, yeah, you have it to a certain extent, but like you can't control everything in life. You know, you don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next. You know, you don't know. You just never know in life. Everything's always as and when and if and buts and maybes, and there's no guarantees. Everything's always, you live in this state of, you just really, your life, most of your life is lived through, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to come next. I hope this happens, but I don't know. And that's essentially, you know, my kind of overall thinking about going back to the UK is like, you know, what happens now? You know, what happens when I leave Thailand? What happens when I go back to the UK? Okay, I go and live with my sister. You know, how long is it going to be before I get a job? You know, what do I have to do to get into some kind of stable job or career? That's probably going to have to mean going to college or undertaking some kind of training, maybe going to university perhaps. But again, everything costs money, and it's like, you know, if you haven't got a job, you haven't got a stable job or career, it's like, well, good luck doing that stuff. You know, and if you find yourself unemployed, then you've got to go through all the bureaucratic bullshit of you know, the welfare system over there, which is another ball ache, because it's basically a punitive system of, you know, destroy people's confidence and self-esteem to such an extent that people will just take any old shit. That's what it really is. It's just a system of get people off the books as quickly. And I get it. You know, I understand that people getting up at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning are pissed off about the fact that part of their money is going towards propping up a system that they're not really using, even though it's actually technically there for them as well. But anyway, that's another thing. But so it's the fact that, like, I don't want to go back, but I feel like I have to go back. That's the truth of it. I don't want to go back and fucking see the same city I grew up in, you know, and see how things keep changing. Every time I go back, things have changed in some way or other, you know. Some building that I used to see has got torn down. Some buildings more deteriorated than it used to be. You know, this part of the city is a fucking shithole now. This part's a dump. You know, this place, or even entire parts of the city that I used to see and loved growing up have been completely flattened and redeveloped. And, you know, there's parts of my city now that look nothing like they did back in the day. You know, maybe in some ways that's a good thing, because it's, you know, it gives people some hope and inspiration. Like, it's nice to have new things, I guess. But, you know, in terms of the trip down memory lane, it's like, it means you don't recognize it anymore. It's like, and you just end up like this. You end up like just, you know, there's a reason why people become that kind of, oh, back in my day, this used to be this place was actually this at that time. This used to be this shop. This used to be an old school, blah, blah, blah. That's what happens, isn't it? That's what happens over enough time, over enough decades, you know. Buildings deteriorate, things crumble, things get old, things get outdated. You know, transport changes. You know, the way people dress changes. You know, music changes, fashions change. New technologies come online, and you know, it's over the course of a couple of decades. You know, you don't recognise the place anymore. It's like a different world almost. Yeah, it's the same place, it's the same geographical area, but it's like, it's different, isn't it? It's a different place. And sometimes just going back, like, I don't want to go back. I want to go forwards in life. I'm tired of going back. That's all I've seemed to have really done, if I'm honest with you, like for the last couple of years. It's just, I just feel like I've just kept going back. Like I never really seemed to make any real progress. I never really seemed to achieve anything, you know, like I never really seemed to reach any real sense of like competence or success in anything I do. Yes, I mean, like, you know, don't get me wrong, and like, it's, you know, I do miss my family, even though we have a very complicated relationship with each other. I do miss them, you know, it's nice to see them, but, you know, they do get on your nerves at times, and, you know, after a while you kind of want to see the bloody back of them, to be honest with you, and I'm sure it's the same for them towards me, so it's like, but that's family, you know, that is how families are. It's complicated as you get older, when everyone becomes an adult, you know, it gets more difficult, it's more raw, it's, you know, there's a lot of elephants in the room kind of thing going on. It's awkward, it's hard to have a really open, you know, especially if you come from a family like mine that's already kind of pretty fucked up and dysfunctional anyway, then you're gonna face some really awkward. The thing is, I found with my family is, you know, the best thing you can do is just to have surface level conversations, really. You know, there's no point digging deep. It's no point really exploring the past. You know, what's done is done. It's, you know, water under the bridge kind of thing. And in any case, they're not interested in revisiting and opening old wounds and stuff like that. And that's fine or whatever. But it also means that parts of you never really heal either. It means that, I guess what this trip going back to the UK means is like, it's this thing of like opening old wounds and never really feeling like I can really close doors on certain parts of myself. You know, it's always this thing of like unresolved traumas, unresolved problems, and you know, and especially when you see people that you were friends with, or people that you used to really, you know, girls you used to like at one time, and it's hard. It's really difficult. You know, you root for them. You know, you want them to have a good life and everything, of course. But like, you know, you sometimes do think to yourself, I mean, sometimes you're glad that it's not, you know, you're not their partner anymore. You know, sometimes some people you see think, thank God nothing ever came of that. You know, thank God nothing. You know, we didn't stay together. Or so sometimes it's kind of, it's better that things changed. But sometimes, you know, I don't know. It just depends, doesn't it? You know, sometimes you think that friendship could have really worked out, you know, that relationship could have happened, that could have worked out, but I guess in the end, you know, you just can't live your entire life with that ifs and buts mentality, can you? There's no point clinging on to what was, because you'll only just find yourself in prolonged longing and heartache and stress and feeling down. I do miss things like everybody. You know, I'm only a human being. I do miss parts of myself. I do miss parts of how my life used to be in some ways. You know, I miss riding around as a teenager on my bike, you know, walking around the city during the summer, you know, coming back from the nightclub at, you know, early hours in the morning and still feeling safe at that time. You know, I miss holding hands with Rebecca, and we used to go after school. We used to go to the cemetery, just kind of sit, because there was like, you know, there was like a little area you could sit down. We used to just sit down and talk, and you know, when we used to go home, and she used to, because we lived in opposite directions, so we used to like hug each other, I think, or kiss each other, and then like she'd go in one direction, I'd go in the other, and every now and then we'd just turn around and we'd just happen to lock, just be looking at each other at the same time, and we'd smile, and it was just so naive, so typically teenage puppy love, it was just so. And, us meeting together in the lunch hall and spending some time together there. And I really miss that. I miss laughing with my friends in the playground. And I was going outside the school during the lunch hour. And I just miss the sense of like, kind of rebelliousness, I guess, the sense of freedom that I used to have when I was a teenager. There was a real magic to it, and it's not just those things that I felt had value or meaning to them, but the things surrounding them, the time itself, the way things looked, the way things smelled back then, the way things felt, the lighting, the mood, the styles of the day, And I'm not saying that everything was wonderful or perfect, because no decades are, no period of time is perfect. But sometimes I think compared to today, it's it was a real magical place and time for me. I'd say the late 90s, early to mid 2000s. They were really special times, man. They really were. They really were. So naive. So full of life. So full of hope. So full of optimism about the future and where my life might. I used to think about that, a bit. I never really thought about the long-term future. I used to just think of like, maybe a year or a couple of years ahead, and how free I was back then. I didn't realise it. I didn't appreciate it. I didn't really truly appreciate it. Because I never thought it would end. I thought I would be young forever. I thought I would be naive forever. But as time went on, friendships fell by the wayside, and became an adult and had an adult relationship for the first time, and developed new friendships than the ones that were formed during my school years. And just gradually, as everybody started to go on their own ways and start to get partners or started to get married, and things kind of things just kind of just went away. Just gradually, slowly but surely, things just started to change. Suddenly you didn't hear from certain people as much anymore. Relationships started to end. People started to move away. Some people died. People I knew got sick. People I knew died. I miss the past, but I think probably I think overall there are snapshots that I miss from the past rather than the past overall. I don't miss everything about the past. It wasn't all great, but I miss the good times from the past. Good moments. The moments where my grandparents were still alive. Where I still had friends. Where I was still young. Much fitter and energetic and longing for the future still. Places I used to spend time with on the local park, the local field, which seemed massive to me at that time. It wasn't your typical park, it was just like an open field. You had this like small park and there was this cemetery behind it. And I remember listening to the rustling of the trees there, and that used to be quite a big hangout spot for me when I was a teenager. And then I used to go and spend a lot of time down by the docks when I was 15, 16. I used to spend a lot of time in the train station by myself. And it never really bothered me, I just always felt, I always kind of relatively felt safe, I suppose, and I felt free. And I don't feel that anymore. I don't feel free anymore. I don't feel hopeful anymore. I don't feel happy anymore. I haven't felt these things in years. I felt bogged down with the weight of myself and life overall, and just the passing of time, and one after the other, another member of my family passes away and another thing comes and goes and another change happens, and me and my friends, David and Ashley, we used to go out on bikes, and we used to spend a lot of time with each other. And at one time in the mid-2000s, when we were part of the Boys Brigade, and and there were things that bound us together back then. There were things that we did, and we had hobbies, and we did things. We spent time with each other. How did I end up in a place where I ended up with no hobbies? How did I end up in a place where I don't leave the house anymore, or I don't do anything anymore, or I don't speak to people for days on end for the most part? How did I get old so quickly? How the fuck am I 35 years old already? Like, I swear like I was 20, 21 years old. Like, it only feels like a few years ago. It wasn't that long ago. And it wasn't really, but it feels like a lifetime ago now. Sometimes, and then the other days it's like, it doesn't feel like it was that long ago. Having my first girlfriend, having my first friendships, kissing a girl for the first time, having my first girlfriend as a teenager, and my first, leaving school and going to the next school, summer school. I remember that. They were really good times. 2001 was a great year. It was the early 2000s, man. They were fucking great years. They really were wicked years. For all sorts of reasons, just like, consoles, gaming consoles, just the music of the time, the fashion. There was still that 90s thing going on, and it just felt like the world was on and up at that time. It felt like we were going somewhere. There was a real positivity in the air, I would say. I suppose even still, I'd say even in 2002 or 2003, there was still a sense of it. I mean, obviously 9/11 happened, and, it was obviously an incredible tragedy, and, obviously that had a massive impact on people feeling safe, and, obviously it had massive consequences on the lives of us in terms of our privacy and security and everything. But even with that, and I think probably as a bit of a reaction to that in some ways, there was a real sense of, there was more of a sense of love in music. There was more of a sense of happiness and buoyancy and energy back then, just the fact with trance and like with so much electronic music in the charts, and it was just this really incredible time of like a mixed blend of different things, and hope for the future, still kind of a bit of a traditional way of life back then. The internet hadn't quite took over everything just yet. The smartphone was a few years away. Social media was not really anything like it is today for the most part, I would say. And it was just a different world. It was a different time, Everything was different back then. The way people spoke and it was just, there was more of a different, that old school generation was still around back then, That 20s, 30s generation was still kicking about, and there was still a sense of, I think, to some extent, still a bit of like respect and appreciation, I would say, overall for authority, and it certainly wasn't perfect. I'm not saying, I'm not naive. I don't look back with rose-tinted glasses, but I'm not saying things were perfect, but compared to now, it was we took it for granted. We didn't realise just how lucky we were. I didn't realise how lucky I was. I do now, with the benefit of hindsight and distance and time and reflection. But at the time, you don't realise it, because it's just the way of life. That's the norm of the time, and I didn't appreciate my youth. I took it for granted. We take things for granted. We really do. And it's only when you go back to places, you see old familiar faces, that you realise that things have gone, things have changed, things have moved on. And so have you. And it's a hard pill to swallow. And sometimes it's really heartbreaking to go back and see people and places and spaces that once meant so much to you, and now feel like things that you don't really recognise anymore. So many things have come and gone in my lifetime, So many things have changed. I've gone through so many different variations of myself in terms of how I felt, what I thought. I just don't recognise myself sometimes anymore. As when I compare myself, certainly when I look at today's youth, I don't see myself in them. There's a real disconnect. There's a real sense of alienation. There's a real sense of isolation. There's a real sense that I don't belong in this world anymore. I don't fit in. I feel weird out in public. I feel like the odd one out. I feel just disconnected from reality, really. It's nice to have hindsight. It's nice to have the ability to look back and reflect and reminisce. But what does it really do for you in the end? What does it really bring you anything positive? Is it really beneficial to look back? Is it really healthy for you to reminisce? Is it even beneficial for you to have any hindsight? What does it matter? If something, now could have helped you 20, 30 years ago. It's like, okay, great, you've learnt something, but it's too late now, isn't it? It's like I should have known that then. So, is it really wisdom? I don't know. Surely wisdom or rather intelligence is to figure things out as best as you can at the time. But I guess, at the end of the day, you can only reach a certain degree of hindsight and wisdom with time and experience, I guess. Sometimes you have to be outside of things to appreciate them, to truly understand them, or at least certainly have a different perspective on things. And so I think we just take life for granted. Just as we do today, this world, this time, this period of time. One day this will be gone. One day we will no longer be using smartphones, iPads anymore. Wi-Fi will become a thing of the past. The clothes we're wearing right now we will no longer have in our houses anymore. The things that we spend so much time on will become irrelevant to us, not unimportant, outdated, old, tacky, cringy. The world we see around us will one day be entirely different. And, there will come a point where we will long for this time as well, just as much as you do a decade back, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, beyond. We will look back at this time in some ways and say, yeah, it wasn't perfect, but by God, compared to the 2030s or 40s or 50s, the 2020s weren't actually that bad apart from the COVID bit. We never really truly value time, man. We don't value it. We don't really truly appreciate it. Because we're living in it, you see. We're living in it, so we take it for granted. We don't really ever truly believe that it will die. We don't really believe in death, I think. We can't believe in it. We don't want to believe in it. We can't accept it. We can't accept change, I think. I think it's just a flawed part of the mind. The human mind is to look for something to cling on to, is to find some kind of thing that, oh no, it hasn't changed actually. It hasn't changed as much. It's not as different as I think it is, but it is. A decade ago is not the same as today. Certainly 20, 30 years ago isn't the same as today. The people that you knew at school aren't the same as they were the last time you saw them. If you saw them, a couple of, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, they've fucking changed. They're different people now. And you are as well. You're a stranger. You're a stranger to you're a stranger to the vast majority of people that you once knew at school. They don't know anything about you anymore unless you've kept in touch with them or whatever. But even if you have, if you don't spend much time with them, it's like, I've contacted people over the years that I've seen them at school, and they're just, some of them are kind of the same, just older and with kids, and some of them have changed quite a bit. They think differently now. They have a different sense of humour. Some of them think, oh, why do you talk like that? Why do you sound like that? Why do you think like that? Because I haven't fucking seen you in 15 years. Because I've grown up. I've become an adult. I had some degree of responsibility and accountability for myself. Clearly you haven't in some ways, apart from having kids. Sometimes it's just better. Sometimes in life, the best thing is to do is just to move the fuck on. It's just to move on from places and people that were once part of your life, because it'll bring you so much fucking misery. It will bring you so much heartache that you cannot believe it. And you will get stuck in these cycles of this utter pit of desperation, man. This pit of suffering that you can't, I've been through it. The longing for the past, the longing for that person, the longing for this for something to happen again, hoping for something. You don't want to live like that. You really don't want to live like that. That is a fucking horrible way to live your life. That will bring you an untold amount of turmoil, believe you me, because I've been there, I've done it. Move on when you know it's time to move on. Do what you've got to do, but keep moving on in life. Don't get stuck in the past. Move on. Look for something better. Look for something new. Look for something to replace those things that once meant something to you. Find something to replace it with. That's my advice. Because life's too short, man. It's too short to keep longing for things that have gone, have changed, have things, people that don't care about you anymore. They don't even think about you anymore. They don't care. They're not interested. They're too busy raising the kids. They're too busy getting married or, moving on somewhere else. They're too busy moving on their own lives. That's the best thing you can do, is just to move on. Keep moving on. Move on to something new, something interesting, something that gives you a reason to feel the way that you used to feel about yourself. That's what it comes down to in the end. Moving on is not so much about forgetting the past. It's about replacing things that have gone, have changed with new things. That's what matters, I think, in the end. It's not about pretending that the past didn't exist. It's about confronting the past, but saying that was a period of my life that doesn't exist anymore. That was a part of myself that's evolved. It's changed. It's like a plant that you plant today. You come back 5 years from now, it's grown, it's bigger, it's stronger. That's what you should be. Be that plant. Otherwise, you'll get stuck in years of stagnation, and it won't bring you any happiness in the end.